The evidence behind the charges against 6 Atlanta police officers is rooted in body cam footage shot Saturday. The 6 officers confront 2 young motorists, use tasers on them, and then pull them out roughly from their car downtown, without justification, according to investigators. District Attorney Paul Howard says Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields first called attention to the rough treatment seen on the body cam footage. Howard saw the video and filed charges against the officers after Shields had fired 2 of them.
The second officer is Willie Sauls, and charged with aggravated assault of Ms. Pilgrim, and this is for pointing a taser at Mrs. Pilgrim. And as many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
A taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
We are continuing to follow new developments out of Atlanta tonight. Action was swift after 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed after a scuffle with police outside a Wendy's on Friday night. It all happened after police say Brooks failed a sobriety test, fought with those officers, and ran away with one of their tasers.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon.
In addition to body cameras, dash cams, and cell phone footage from a bystander, the most revealing angle seems to be the one you're watching now from a surveillance camera.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
A surveillance camera at the Wendy's. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation says it shows Brooks running away from the officers, turning toward them and firing the taser before one of the officers shoots him with his gun. Last hour, I spoke to Justin Miller, one of the attorneys for the family of Rayshard Brooks. Here's what he told me.
They didn't have to take this man or attempt to take him into custody because he was sleeping in his car. They didn't have to take this man or attempt to take him into custody because he was sleeping in his car. He was trying to do the right thing. He didn't want to drive drunk. He was stopped. He was not a threat to anyone. They could have taken his keys. They could have said, hey, what's your wife's number? Call her, let her come pick you up. They could have done any number of things. Just because you tussle with an officer, it shouldn't be a death sentence for anyone. He was trying to do the right thing. He didn't want to drive drunk. They could have done any number of things. Just because you tussle with an officer, it shouldn't be a death sentence for anyone.
Right now, Officer Devin Bronson has been placed on administrative leave, and Officer Garrett Rolfe has been terminated. 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks was shot dead inside a Wendy's parking lot after tussling with police over a taser.
Tonight, the Fulton County District Attorney says the officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks could face murder or felony charges.
Well, Sean, District Attorney Paul Howard says he expects to know by the middle of the week what charges former Officer Garrett Rolfe will face for the shooting death of Rayshard Brooks. Now, the District Attorney says there are really 3 charges that are relevant, the first 2 being murder and felony murder. He says the only other charge that would make sense would be a voluntary manslaughter charge.
This man was shot in the back while fleeing, and he was using a taser, which is not a deadly weapon.
How many of us had been in a drive-through or in a parking lot as a consequence of overwork, sleep deprivation, falling asleep? This is a metaphor for the state of policing in this country.
Chief, I don't want to paint with so broad a brushstroke that we see this case as exactly the same as George Floyd. George Floyd was in handcuffs. He was on the ground. He was under an officer's knee for almost 9 minutes. In this case, there was a potentially dangerous crime. He was drunk driving. And I guess what I see...
He was parking, Allison, that's not fair. That man was asleep in a car parking lot. He ran and he realized that his life was at risk. That is why he took that taser. He was trying to fight back because every time we don't fight back, we die. And I don't want to take away the chief's time, but please don't paint it that way. That is not fair.
Angela, he was in, I mean, let's just be clear. Let's just be clear about the facts. He was in a drive-through lane, so cars were having to go around him. So he didn't just go to a parking lot and fall asleep.
But Howard says he expects the choice to be between those first 2. In a statement, the DA's office mentions that because this is a homicide investigation, there are several technical requirements that must be met before that decision can be made.
Because what we're trying to determine is at that time whether or not the officers felt their lives were in danger, and specifically Officer Roth, whether or not he felt that Mr. Brooks at that time presented imminent harm of death or some serious physical injury. As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law. The alternative is whether or not he fired the shot simply to capture him.
All right, you need police, fire, ambulance out here.
The police.
Okay, tell me what's going on.
I have a car. I think he's intoxicated. He's in the middle of my drive-thru. I tried to wake him up, but he's parked dead in the middle of the drive-thru, so I don't know what's wrong with him.
Is he breathing now? Do you know?
Yeah, he woke up, looked at me, and I was like, you got to move out of the drive-thru because people can't. They're going around him. He's in the middle of the, just right there.
All right. Tell me what kind of car he
So they're trying to go around him.
What's the
and
color
I
of
asked
it?
him to pull over. You know, if he done had too much to drink, to pull over and go to sleep. He said they said he went right back after I walked in.
What kind of car is it?
It's a white car. He just sitting there. You can't miss me.
Is he black? Is he black, white, Hispanic, or Asian?
Yeah. He black.
Okay, in a white sedan in the middle of the drive-thru?
No, let me see what kind of car. It's right here. He's right here. The car's going around him.
Okay. All right. Does he appear to have any weapons, ma'am?
Ma'am?
Does he appear to have any weapons from where you can see him?
No, I think he's intoxicated.
Well, I think one thing that's really important to note here was that Mr. Brooks was unarmed, right? So the whole question of whether the officer who fired was in fear of his life, felt threatened, that seems to be a harder question to gauge simply because Mr. Brooks had a taser. It's not a deadly weapon. It doesn't necessarily require confrontation.
A taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
Mr. Brooks had a taser. It's not a deadly weapon.
A taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
Taser, it's not a deadly weapon. It doesn't necessarily require confrontation to be met with deadly force. And so I think that is definitely something the prosecutor will be weighing. The charges could range anywhere from murder, which either requires an intentional killing, or alternatively felony murder, which is a murder committed during the course of some other inherently dangerous felony. Here, it might be aggravated assault, for example, or it could be a form of killing that doesn't necessarily require an intent to kill, but rather some form of less extreme recklessness or negligence, like involuntary manslaughter. And all of those, I think, are on the table. And a lot will depend on the statements made at the time of the incident. The fact that the officer said after Mr. Brooks was shot, I got him, that may weigh in favor here. And of course, the history that this officer has as well may also play a role.
Now have yet another death of an unarmed African-American man at the hands of white police officers.
If we can use diplomacy and de-escalation with respect to the North Koreans who have nuclear arms, why can't we teach police departments to use de-escalation with respect to unarmed civilians? We need to defund what doesn't work and invest and fund those things which do work.
Speaking on CNN, Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard says he's considering criminal charges against the two officers, but is waiting on more evidence.
One of the things that we must attempt to finalize before we make a decision is to confirm the ballistics. We try to make sure that the projectiles in the body of Mr. Brooks, that we can expertly trace them to a firearm.
I am your voice.